full effect, and I end up coughing a bit, so wheezing. All right, here comes Dan. All right, so let's take up our meditation postures. Remembering that the physical needs of meditation indicate that we should be reasonably comfortable, perhaps not too comfortable, but comfortable enough. And we should be upright and physically prepared to participate, to learn, to listen, to watch, but not bolt upright, not upright by virtue of contracting all the muscles in your back and your belly. That's not what we're after. And if your body requires it, feel free to recline, with the caveat that if you're lying down, there's a chance that you will overshoot and go to sleep. So our physical posture is directly tied to our physical needs to breathe freely, to be reasonably comfortable, to be able to sit here for an hour. The physical posture is also a metaphor for what we are hoping to do with our minds, which is to say we want to come into a very relaxed but also alert state of mind. And then lastly, the physical posture is also the proximal cause of mental relaxation and mental alertness. So it's a metaphor, but it is also the thing that most closely conditions our mind to be the way we want to be during this meditation. So this will be with a healthy, happy, long, tall spine. And remembering that the spine runs from the coccyx at the bottom in the back, this would be your tailbone, and then curves slightly one way in the lower back, and then curves the other way in the upper back, curves again in the muscles, the vertebra of your neck. So an upright, straight spine is not bolt straight, it is not rigid, it is actually quite relaxed. And so you are looking to come into an upright position, not supported if you don't need it in the back, but also very balanced. We want to balance primarily forward and backward, but we also want to make sure that we are relatively balanced to the left and to the right, because sitting for 40-50 minutes in a very crooked way is likely to cause contraction on one side of the back or the other. So let's begin our body relaxation today by checking in with the orbits around the eyes. It is okay during this practice to keep your eyes open. In fact, for part of this, it may be preferable. You can go ahead and give yourself a little rub around the orbits of the eyes if you'd like to. This just signals to the body that you are doing something a little different than usual. We will be turning our gaze inward, or if we are turning our gaze outward, if we are picking some kind of meditation object outside the body, then our relationship with that object is going to be based on a great deal of stillness and receptivity on our part. So if you keep your eyes open, you simply allow the lids to become heavy. You allow your gaze to drop to someplace approximately 10 feet in front of you, and then allow the gaze to soften. Right? This is exactly the opposite of what we would be doing if we are looking at a computer screen and tracking information, or looking at a person's face and tracking what they're up to, what we think they might be thinking, or how they might be feeling. The object, if we're choosing a visual object, the object of that meditation is to hold still enough that we begin to see that there is a relaxation in what happens in what we see. And bit by bit, the things that we see will begin to fade a little bit. They'll become wiggly around the edges. And this is the same when we are working with our interiority, that when we place our attention on a relatively fixed object for any length of time and let it sit there, then it tends to fade. It tends to weaken. It tends to shift or move or become unsolid. So bring your attention into the muscles of your cheeks and your jaws, left side and right side. You might move your lower jaw around a little bit just to wake up the muscles, but also to let them know that it's time to release, to relax, to let go. And then bring your attention to the orbit of muscles surrounding your mouth. This would be up above your upper lip and below your lower lip and to each side. These would be the muscles involved with talking, with smiling, with frowning, with grimacing. And in this case, we are looking to allow these muscles to become still, to become soft, to become completely pliant. And the metaphor there would be that we are not smiling a great deal or laughing or grimacing or what have you. We're simply allowing ourselves to become aware of the feelings, the emotions, the physical sensations without falling into a pattern of feeling and reacting, feeling and reacting. We're just skipping the reacting part. Allow attention to come into the mouth on the inside. You can feel your tongue, feel your teeth, your cheeks. And allow your tongue to become soft. Your teeth can be just barely together or slightly apart, relaxed, not gritting, not bearing down in any way. And then bring attention into your throat, the back of the tongue, the back of the throat, the whole area above and below the voice box. And again, we're allowing this area to completely relax, to unwind, to become soft, and ideally to become wide open. We want to leave a very unconstricted path for air to come and go. Shoulders should hang down softly, gently. The muscles of your arms and shoulders and hands all become completely slack, completely at ease. The muscles around your neck, the front and the back, becoming soft, open. And notice that as your shoulders and your chest and back muscles soften and release and relax, that the mind naturally tends to come with. The body releases and relaxes. The mind begins to release and relax. And then on the next in-breath, go ahead and deepen your in-breath and continue to take relatively long, deep in-breaths. This is not normal breathing. This is not simply relaxing through your breath, but actually taking deep, invigorating breaths. It's okay if this is audible and makes a sound. And just feel into the upper body, the whole area between your shoulders and your chest, your rib cage, your belly, your middle and lower back, around the sides. Feel how it feels to take these deeper, longer breaths. And we'll count this relatively deep breathing as your base practice for the evening. So if you get lost, if you get confused, if you just lose track of what I was saying, whatever, then come back to this deep, elongated breathing until you're settled, until you're relatively concentrated, and then move into the next phase. There's no need to try to go back and to pick up the other layers. Also, if you find that you are becoming muddy or tired, sleepy in any way, you can come back to this deeper breathing, and it's okay to take quite deep, quite long breaths if you're becoming a little fuzzy. Good. Now bring the full of your attention to your belly. And with belly, I refer to the entire area between your pelvic floor and the bottom of your rib cage. And so this will include the front of your tummy, the sides, all the way around through your lower back and your kidney region. And come into very close contact with this deep belly breath, and come into contact with it at first from the inside, so that with each deep inhale, you feel your belly expand, enlarge, puff up round like a balloon, perhaps some kind of ball. And then on the out breath, we feel a relaxation, a falling in the front of the belly. And then again with the in-breath, the large expansion, the sense of roundness, the smoothness with which this takes place. There will be a tendency to return to normal breathing, and we'll get there soon, but for the time being, continue to take nice, long, deep breaths. And you may become aware that this is both energetically demanding and energy producing. So there is a modest amount of physical demand in taking deep breaths. It is also physically energizing. It is waking. And mentally, it requires just a little more input to keep breathing this way. And the result is often a slightly heightened sense of awareness, of crispness. And throughout the experience, the body continues to relax, to release, to unwind, to shake off the feelings, the thoughts, the memories, everything that was elsewhere, less important now, and everything that we're doing here and now, we are doing here and now. as you continue breathing deeply into the belly, bring a higher level of sensitivity to the full range of sensation that accompanies the deep in-breath. This may be the sense of expansion. You can expand to include any sensations you feel in the muscle walls, in your skin, perhaps the skin moving against your shirt, pressing back against something, and then releasing and relaxing. Exhale. You may become aware that your attention is drawn elsewhere for moments. You may feel other parts of your body beginning to relax, to unwind. You may notice that there are thoughts or sounds. All of these things will continue, and there's no need to shut them out. But do allow everything that is not directly related to belly breathing to fade into the background, so that peripheral awareness remains on, and everything that is not belly breathing is relegated to the periphery. Often be the case that as we settle into a more focused awareness, we also settle into a deep state of relaxation, and that both this heightened awareness and this deepened relaxation tend to produce relatively pleasant sensations. It's okay to tune in to those pleasant sensations, to become aware of all the sensations as they happen, but particularly aware to the things that feel good. Now open awareness to all of the sensations, whether they are pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And in a very slow, very gentle way, allow yourself to begin to label individual sensations as either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Check with the breathing. Check to see that there is a smooth cycle of in-breath and out-breath. Check to see if there is any holding or any constriction of any kind. Sometimes we will constrict to make the breath more evident, or there will be some subtle holding in the way we're sitting. If you find any place that is tight, any kind of substantial pause, see if there's any way to release and relax around that, to let your body soften and to let your mind soften. And then return to the physical sensations of breathing in the belly. And then choose a sensation that is either persistent or recurring. And allow this to become the focus of your meditation. And each time this sensation arises or re-arises, simply give it a very light, very gentle label. Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. If any kind of thought arises, you can expand your labeling to note whether the thought itself is pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, and then return awareness to the physical sensations of breathing. Good. Now you can allow your awareness to expand. You'll stay based in the belly breathing. You can allow your awareness to include any of the other sensations in the body. Any place that is prominent or repetitive, simply notice that spot And very lightly label the sensation as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Good. Now, if you've been exerting any effort to breathe deeply, you can go ahead and let that go. Stop doing that. And if you've been exerting any effort to label or differentiate, you can stop doing that. So drop beneath the labels, beneath any concepts, and simply allow awareness to be drawn wherever it goes, and to feel deeply into the sensations of the body. If you find that you are becoming drifty or sleepy, simply come back to deep breathing into the belly. If you sense any kind of constriction or holding anywhere in the body or the mind, simply allow that to release, to relax. If you're experiencing any kind of doubt, allow yourself to relax and release into that doubt. If you find that your mind is persistently wandering, simply give it more room and allow your attention to settle back a little more still, a little less involved. You may find that you have become relatively relaxed, that the thoughts and feelings and physical sensations come more slowly. It is also possible that as we drop down through layers of relaxation, that some thoughts or some feelings may present themselves as extra juicy. In any case, for any sense phenomena that you encounter, whether it's a sight or a sound, a physical sensation, a subtle impulse of the mind or body, simply meet that phenomena by saying, "Not me, not mine." The phenomena may be beautiful, it may be delightful, it may be challenging in some way or another. Either way, if you notice it, simply remind yourself, "Not me, not mine." If you would like to take this a step further, then continue to notice phenomena as they arise and pass away. And give yourself the gentle reminder that this phenomena does not belong to my awareness. There is no ownership whatsoever. If you get drifty or entrained in a thought, simply return to the physical sensations of breathing in the belly. And then remind yourself that none of these sensations belong to you or to awareness. They are not owned by anything at all. And if you'd like to take this a step further, you can remind yourself that awareness does not belong to any of these phenomena. They arise together, mutually dependent, mutually conditioned, but completely devoid of ownership, of self. There is no self witnessing, and there is no self inherent to that which is witnessed. If you'd like to go a step further, you can begin to remind yourself that for each phenomena that arises, that this is a perception. And all perceptions are fabricated. This is a perception. All perceptions are empty. All perceptions are not self. All perceptions are fabricated. Or simply note, this is a perception. Good. At this point, if you would like to shift, you can begin to bring metta, or kindness, to any sensation that arises, any thought, any feeling, any impulse. There is no need to use words or labels. Simply allow yourself to bring great kindness and great generosity to any phenomenon that happens. You can continue to bring loving kindness to phenomena as they arise. You can also begin to notice that if any of the sensations or thoughts, or feelings that arise are unpleasant, that you can begin to bring pleasantness to them. This may begin with bringing loving kindness to a difficult sensation. It might involve bringing the kindness inherent to kind attention, so paying attention closely to something as it's happening. And then begin to notice that if you bring kindness to a phenomenon as it has arisen, if you bring a pleasant abiding to any phenomenon, that some portion of that experience is pleasant. Some portion of that experience is imbued with the kindness and with the generosity that you have aroused. And some part of you is then in relation with the kindness, with the pleasantness. If there is room for it in your experience, as you continue to bring love and kindness and a sense of pleasant abiding to any of the phenomena that arise, you can begin to shift attention over from the phenomenon itself to the pleasant abiding, to the kindness. You can allow this to enlarge by loosening around it, by continuing to feed these wholesome attributes. And you can shift into meditating specifically on the pleasant abiding. Meditating on pleasant sensation. And so in this way, whether you are working with metta or you are working with a pleasant sensation, you can allow the pleasant feeling, the pleasant abiding to become relatively solid, relatively stable. And by meditating on that pleasant abiding, come into a state of samadhi, concentration, unification. Now, take a moment to work with the following inquiry. If you have become relaxed, if you have discovered pleasant abiding or a source of kindness and appreciation, consider your whole being right now. Body, your heart, your mind. And as you turn the gaze back inward, is there any sense of self? Is there any sense of ownership? Is there any sense of desire or aversion? And if you are able to find any of these, is there more or less of that than there was an hour ago? Toward the end of a meditation, we become quite sensitive. And we can fall into believing that the sensation in the knee or the back is quite strong. But overall, how are you feeling right now? All right, in a moment I will ring the bell. There is no need to do anything or come back quickly. Take your time and pay very close attention to what happens over the next few moments. So for the last several weeks, we have been working with emotional healing. And we've talked about this on the macro level and on the micro level. So on the macro level, we have all the feelings, happy, sad, angry, all the rest of it. And on the micro level, we have Vedana, which is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And I'm hoping that I've made the case for the fact that these two are isomorphs of each other, which is to say they are basically the same thing, but taken on different scales. So when we look very close and very tight, very quietly, we see that there is this push and this pull, this sense of pleasant or unpleasant. And then if we look in the broader picture of our life, we find that there are also these emotions, and that they can be pleasant or unpleasant, that they are associated with a certain push or pull, that these things have energy and valence. And tonight I'm hoping to draw some parallels between what we do with these things and this larger, trickier topic of emptiness. So I'd like to try to put emotional healing and healing around Vedana in the context of the Dharma, and show that the way that we work with each of these things is essentially the same. So if we are talking about emotion, or if we're talking about Vedana, the first step in practice is to develop a sensitivity to it, to develop awareness. So for a lot of people, it can be a real eye-opener to know that they have a wide range of emotions, that each of the emotions can be given a name, that each of the emotions can be felt in the body someplace. And it's perhaps less surprising to learn that if we slow down and become quiet in our meditation, that we can feel this thing Vedana. We can begin to perceive it, we can become sensitive to it, and we can also label that. We can say that this is pleasant, we can say it's unpleasant. If we notice something but it's not real strong at either end, we can say that's neutral. And when we begin to listen to these things, instead of simply reacting to them, when we begin to give them names, when we begin to pause and take a look at them, we're actually coming into a kind of dialogue with this stuff. And entering into dialogue is a entry into relationship. So when we are working with emotional healing, we are coming into relationship with the emotions. And we're coming into a very intentional relationship. So to heal with regards to emotions, we come into relationship with emotions. To heal or to grow with regards to Vedana, we come into relationship with Vedana. And then when we heal with regards to emptiness, or the dependent origination of things, or this sort of general misunderstanding that we tend to have about how the world actually operates, we come into relationship with that. We come into relationship with this larger picture of how things actually work. Cultivating this kind of relationship automatically imposes a degree of detachment from the thing that was happening before. So if you are cultivating a relationship with your emotions, you are no longer quite as fused with those emotions. You're not quite as submerged in them when they happen. So you may still have quite strong emotions. You may still respond very quickly and very strongly to things. But as your relationship with the emotion grows, you're not so deep in it all the time. You're able to step back just a little bit. And that detachment, whereas detachment might be a negative thing or a neutral thing elsewhere in life, in this practice, detachment is universally positive. We are unattaching. We are disaggregating. We are breaking free from. And the same thing happens down at this level of Vedana, where we begin the practice by labeling things as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And as we do that, we enhance the awareness of the phenomena itself, but we also take a step back so that we're able to see it, so that we're not just in it, and so that that little push, that little pull, that little sense of desire, of aversion, becomes something that we can observe and gain a tiny sliver of freedom around. And then the same kind of thing begins to happen with this larger sense of self, with this larger sense of impermanence, with this larger sense of emptiness. So as we've said, the cultivation of the relationship ends up becoming important partly because the relationship we have with the thing becomes just as important as the thing itself originally was. So we take our emotions, we give them names, we invite them to tea, we come up with images and fun names for them so that when they happen, we step out of the emotion and we come into the relationship, and that relationship becomes more loose, more open, more free, more loving, more kind. Vedana, as we understand it, also fits into a kind of a complicated model, which is the wheel of dependent origination. And if you're not familiar with Paticca Samuppada or the wheel of samsara, these are basically Buddhist models for how suffering happens. And it sort of goes without saying that the original guy, the Buddha, was pretty much obsessed with this idea of causation. So he wanted to know what causes suffering. And so he starts with suffering and he works his way backwards. So what causes suffering? Well, this causes something that causes suffering. And this causes something that causes something that causes something that causes suffering. And he kept working with this project until he came up with the rather actually kind of terrifying revelation that the causal chain is nonlinear, it's round, it operates as a cycle. And so at very close to the core of how this practice works and how Buddhism is structured is this idea of dependent origination. And with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and try to pull up an image here. This is the first time I've done this, so... Okay, not that. Okay. And share screen. Share. There we go. Is that up for everybody? Okay. All right, let's get a good look at this thing. So the very first thing that I would say about this picture is that it is a picture. In my opinion, it's kind of a well-produced, sexy-looking picture. It's got green on one side and red on the other side. It says a bunch of stuff. Okay. So right off the top, I want to caution against grasping at these models. Okay, there's some stuff going on here. It may be fascinating. Look at your own mind as you look at the picture and ask yourself, is this what I need? Is this the thing that's going to open up all my doubts are going to fade away. All my questions will be answered. And the other version is to look at this thing and to say, oh my God, that's complicated. I really don't want any part of that. Make it simple. So I would say that in terms of dependent origination, this model in particular is extremely useful in organizing your thinking, but it is also potentially very confusing, and you do not need to get this thing. You do not need to take ownership of it. You certainly do not need to memorize any of it. And I showed you this one first because it's so pretty. We're actually going to look at something else in a minute. But let's look at it. There are 12 nidanas on the left side here. This is the stuff in the red. And you can see that suffering begins with ignorance. Ignorance leads to fabrication, leads to consciousness, leads to name and form. Some of these things may be somewhat familiar to you, some may not. The six senses are very likely to be known to each of us. Contact sort of explains itself. That's what happens when your six senses come into contact with one of the with some kind of sense object. Vedana is listed here as feelings. I would prefer to call it feeling tone. And then feeling tones give rise to craving, to clinging, to becoming, to birth, to aging and death and all that produces suffering. Over on the other side, on the green side, we have this sort of staircase: faith, contentment, rapture, calmness, bliss, samadhi. And I'm not actually sure where this came from. There would be all kinds of room here to make comparisons, that one thing is the antidote to the other thing, or that somehow one of these things can be converted into the other thing, and I would let that go completely. The only one that I can see is ignorance on the upper left and faith on the lower right. It may be possible that faith replaces ignorance a little bit, partly. So, with the warning fairly in place, be wary of models. I'm going to shift to what I believe is a much more useful version of the same thing. Okay, boom, 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 and share. Good, and off we go. So you'll see this is just the left side of the wheel there, or just the left side of the previous screen. Once again, we're going to start with ignorance up in the upper right, and we're going to move through formations, consciousness, nama, rupa, name and form, the 6 sense spheres. And you can very clearly see in this model that the entire thing rotates clockwise, that ignorance leads to formations, leads to consciousness, leads to name and form, 6 sense spheres, so on and so forth, winding up with birth, aging, and death, and invariably suffering. This cycle. This looks a lot less like a staircase. It looks a lot less like a path, and I prefer that, because when we're talking about this process, we're not just talking about something that is a path of practice or something that you're going to do. You're going to be working with formations this year and then moving into name and form next year. This is the process that produces suffering, and it's operating really, really quickly. It's like boom, 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 boom. It's happening over and over again, many times a minute, maybe many times a second. And so let go of any thought that this is something that you can latch onto, right? Okay. So in this picture, the stages, or the nidanas, the causal factors, there are 12 of them, and each factor is given as leading to one of the other factors. But the name of this thing is dependent origination. So we're not really just talking about one thing being dependent on the thing immediately prior to it, but about all of these things depending on each other all the time. So consciousness isn't just created by formations. It may be conditioned most proximally by formations, which are conditioned most proximally by ignorance, but consciousness arises as a result of birth. It arises as a result of craving. It arises as a result of contact. And all of these relationships work backwards and forwards in all directions. Okay, so we've gone from something fairly simple that looks like a stepwise progression, from something that is actually a great big cluster of interpenetrating causes. Okay, if you think about that, we are back where we were previously, with a completely circular form of reasoning, completely circular logic. So if one thing causes the next thing, and the next thing causes the next thing, and you come all the way back around the circle, you've basically got something that is causing itself. The life version of that would be to lean over and grab your shoelaces, and then to pick yourself up into the air with your shoelaces, right? And that's a problem. That's an ontological nightmare. There is no way from inside this cycle to say that any one of these things, anything that appears to us by way of this cycle, can be known to be objectively true. Does that make sense for everybody? That if I think last week we talked about if my mood affects my Vedana and my Vedana string affects my mood, we can't possibly rely on knowing anything. And this gives grit and detail to that. Nevertheless, it can be very useful to know the pieces and the parts. And one reason for that is that if you go elsewhere in the Dharma, if you're listening to Dharma talks, you will find that pretty much many of the talks that you'll hear, many of the subjects that you'll hear expanded upon can be traced back to one of these nidanas. Okay, so that in exploring the Dharma, in terms of conveying the Dharma, we will often find ourselves picking a subject like Vedana and then drilling down into it, right? The value of doing that is because each of these causal factors is completely integrated and interpenetrating with each of the others. Any effort you make and any success you have in terms of attenuating any of the suffering connected to any one of these things will reduce suffering overall. It will reduce the power of the cycle, right? And that's a very different mentality than looking at this thing as a set of steps, right? Any one of these things is valuable. So, in order to put our emotional healing and our Vedana into a context, let's go ahead and start. Traditionally, this is start with ignorance. Ignorance is the avijja is the translation that might be better translated as misunderstanding or misconception. We don't know how things really are, right? Which is ignorance. This is often taught particularly as it is related to the three characteristics of anicca, anatta, and dukkha. So if you know self, impermanence, and the inherent nature of suffering, which is bound specifically and inexorably to being alive, if we misunderstand how that stuff works and how it happens, we are stuck inside this wheel and suffering is the inevitable result. When we begin to understand that, we begin to shed some of that ignorance. Sankhara is typically translated as formations. Sankhara is also synonymous with karma or karmic volition. Okay, you can think of this as a kind of wrong knowing. So whereas ignorance is not knowing what's right, sankhara is knowing what's wrong, believing in it. And the way that's related to karma, I think most obviously, is that we pick up all kinds of learning. We pick up all kinds of knowledge through previous experiences. And that is sometimes interpreted as stuff we pick up in previous lives. Sometimes that's interpreted as understandings and knowledge that we formulate in this life. Either way, you're talking about ways of seeing, ways of knowing, ways of being in the world that are specifically conditioned by the entire previous cycle, okay, or by the entire previous set of conditions that came before. Vijnana is consciousness. I'm going to gloss this just a little bit, but consciousness is, Vijnana is also translated as understanding or life force, discernment, knowledge, or intelligence, right? So consciousness does a bunch of stuff. And this becomes helpful in understanding that consciousness itself is actually really, really hard to pin down. That's worth substantial time in and of itself. What exactly is consciousness, and how do we know it's happening? And can you see it while it's happening? You obviously can't see it while it's not happening, but can you actually detect it as separate from any of these other things? It's definitely worth investigating. The key here, again, is to note that under this formulation, consciousness, the way we experience the world, how we see, hear, feel, all of it is already warped. It's warped by past experience, it's warped by ignorance, and it's warped by the rest of the wheel. Namarupa, which is name and form. This is one of the places in classic Buddhist teaching where if you just sound it out and try and figure out what they mean by using your best guesses, you will almost invariably get it wrong. So, name and form. The name portion refers to the mental aspects of experience, and form refers to the physical. Okay, this is how something presents itself to us or shows up in the world in a way that we are aware of. So this is a combination of mental, and we can perceive or feel or make contact. This is the part of the thing that we are aware of, the part that we can work with mentally, the part that presents itself to us. Rupa, the form side, is to say that the thing itself has thingness. It doesn't have permanent thingness, it doesn't have any kind of durable thingness, but in the moment that we make contact, in the moment that we know something, it has both this mental capacity and it has its own thingness. And these come together with our consciousness to provide the arising of the next thing, which is the sense sphere door through which it comes. And when you put Namarupa and the 6 sense spheres together, any one of them, you get that magical moment of contact. Right? You get the thingness of the thing that's outside of you or inside of you. Well, that doesn't work. And you get the contact, and immediately following contact is our old friend Vedana. And we already know plenty about this. Positive or pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. The reason Vedana is so crucial, the reason that we started there with all of this, is because the early Buddhist response to this was that the first 6 pieces on the wheel here, we have, actually the first 7, we have absolutely no control over. None. We don't get to influence the wheel at that point. But with Vedana, there is this little sliver of opportunity, this little place where, with sufficient mindfulness, with sufficient intent, we can begin to get out of this thing. We can begin to get out of this cyclical experience that doesn't have an entrance or an exit. We can begin to unlock it. And Vedana is the linchpin. It's the place where we can put the key in. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, right after Vedana, the path splits. Okay, and when I say path, I mean that very loosely. The path of towards suffering. Without intervention at this point, the wheel continues to roll on to craving, to clinging, to becoming, to birth, age, and death. Okay, all of which are considered to be the mechanics of suffering, if you will. This is where it happens. So between Vedana and Tanha, or craving, there is typically a kind of fusing that happens. Okay, we have this this impulse, okay? Something presents itself as pleasant or unpleasant, and there's this fusing that arises so that we experience craving directly as a result of the feeling tone. Tanha is translated as thirst or craving. I think it might also make sense to think of it as non-satiety or dissatisfaction. It doesn't matter whether you are leaning forward with desire or backward with aversion. Thirst or tanha is not okay with what's actually happening. It wants things to be different, right? And then following right after that, we have clinging, grasping, or attachment, upadana. This also involves a kind of fusing, a kind of mashing together of craving and consciousness, and the object of consciousness, so that reflective awareness disappears. Okay, we feel the thing, we experience the thing, and then we're bound into this experience where we are over here and the thing is over there, and we experience ourselves as separate, but we're actually completely fused with that thing. Does that make sense? We experience alienation, we experience anxiety, we experience a bunch of unpleasant stuff. But according to this formulation, you can't really separate contact, feeling, craving, and clinging. And so the experience of the thing itself is imbued inherently with that distress, with that suffering. And substantially, this fusing creates a sense of self. It creates a sense of self that experiences itself as witnessing the other. And this moves into bhava, or becoming, and birth. We actually give birth to an internal awareness, internal sense that I'm here and that's there. And from our perspective of experience, again, there's this huge distance between it, right? And that distance can exist if we are talking about a piece of food outside us that we want, or it can be about ourselves. If I'm thinking a thought about me, then I've suddenly split into subject and object, okay? And that's difficult. Okay, I think that is enough of making context for this. We're also at time. We will come back and look deeper into this here. I'm trying to think if there's a closing thought that I would give. Simply draw your attention to the line here that says, with the arising of this, that arises. With the cessation of this, that ceases. Okay? And where we go from this is to move away from this idea that the wheel is rotating and that there is a simple cause and effect chain, but this understanding that if any of this arises in complete dependency on each other, that leaves room for this possibility that there's also something called dependent fading. And dependent fading is this idea that if you weaken any portion along the wheel, you weaken the wheel entirely. And there are a couple of key places: the sense of self, the sense of clinging, the sense of Vedana. You can put quite a bit of effort into that area, and you can actually drop the entire thing away. That process is non-linear. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. But while we tend to think in very binaristic terms, left, right, up, down, good, bad, enlightened being over here, complete schlub over here, I have either done it or I haven't done it. The reality is much more subtle and much more sophisticated than that, in that you can reduce a bit here and reduce a bit there, and self just disappears for a little while. And this may be momentary. It may not happen every time you sit meditation. It may happen when you're not sitting meditation. Just these moments where, for whatever reason, you are very serene, where you're not in conflict with your world or your own life experience, where the self just disappears. And when the self is gone, suffering is gone as well, and vice versa. When suffering is gone, the self tends to not present itself. Okay, I don't want to draw this out any later. We've hit time. I will thank you for your practice and for coming and for your attention this evening. Are there any questions or observations, comments you'd like to do before we go?
I really like the wheel, the understanding of the wheel, and knowing that we cannot be attached to a model and it all arises simultaneously. So it's so tightly interlocked. I really like that, also knowing that Vedana is kind of the little lock, the key where the key fits in to kind of unlock this whole thing. And why Vedana is so... Because as we did the meditation, you talked about Vedana and pay attention to the feeling, whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And the thought came to my mind, why is this feeling, paying attention to the feeling so important? And then you explained it. And yeah.
Good. Yeah, it definitely fits into a larger picture. And this idea of developing a relationship with Vedana, or developing a relationship with your emotions, again, is this idea of attenuating the thing that we're stuck in, right? We're stuck in emotion, we're stuck in Vedana, we're stuck in this cycle of suffering. And by cultivating the relationship, you weaken and attenuate the actual cycle, so that the freedom doesn't come from escaping that thing so much as it comes from just weakening it down until it's gone. So one of the there are many phrases and terms for enlightenment, and one of them is the unconditioned, to experience experience in a way that is not conditioned according to the various nidanas on the wheel, right? And so we weaken any of them, we weaken all of them, and at some point we experience that is not set up by this setup for failure, basically. So success in this case does not come from building a thing, right? It comes from revealing what's already there. It comes from seeing differently. Okay. Thank you so much for your practice, and thank you for being here. I appreciate your observations. All right, take care.
Thank you, Doug.
All right, bye, Maini. Hiya!